So speaking of getting around to it, Trump finally got a fucking mugshot. So,
and man, does he have a mug.
He looks pretty rough. To be fair, mugshots are not typically flattering, especially not when you are a puppet just full of ketchup. He's basically a balloon.
I think Mark Meadows' mugshot. I don't know. There's kind of
bad.
I'm sure lots of people will disagree with me, but like I look at Trump's mugshot, he looks like a literal devil. I look at Rudy Giuliani's mugshot, he looks like a vampire. I look at Sidney Powell's mugshot, and she looks like she's about to, I don't know, send an army of flying monkeys at me. But I don't know, something about Mark Meadows' mugshot, like there's kind of like this dangerous energy to it. Like, oh, hello, how you doing?
Wait, now I'm pulling up these
look
mugshots.
at me, I'm dangerous.
I've only seen Trump's. Wow. Oh man, yeah. Some of these people look rough. Yeah, he does have kind of it's a little bit mysterious. It's a little bit.
Yeah.
He kind of looks fucking crazy. Like, listener, if you have a computer,
an endearing way.
Go look this up. He kind of looks like he should be in like a Batman movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, dude.
And I can't tell you if it's as like one of the, people that Batman begrudgingly allies himself with, or as one of the villains. But I don't know. There's something weirdly endearing about his mugshot.
Oh man, I guess we're huge Mark Meadows fans on this show. Wow, that's news to me. Mark Meadows, our golden boy. Okay, so the reason all these people are getting their mugshots taken is because last week, Trump and 18 other defendants, plus like 50 other unnamed co-conspirators, so these 19 people were indicted on 42 total counts in this racketeering case in Georgia, related to their efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. So they were indicted.
That's illegal?
Yeah, it turns out. Yeah, we'll get into some of the legal stuff because this is definitely one of the most novel legal approaches that has been taken so far, and not in like a oh well, I don't know if someone can indict a former president novel legal approach, but kind of like approaching the organization of people around the efforts to overturn the election as an organized crime, essentially. And we'll get so we'll get into that. And so these people have been charged with like a ton of different stuff, and I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of it because literally there's like obviously 41 counts under this indictment, covering 161 overt acts by Trump and his associates in Georgia. But ultimately, the prosecutor in this case said, quote, the enterprise constituted an ongoing organization whose members and associates functioned as a continuing unit for a common purpose of achieving the objective of the enterprise, which is essentially a way of covering all of the actions taken to overturn the 2020 election as as organized crime.
Yeah. And they're doing it under the racketeering, Influenced and Corruption Organizations Act, also known as the RICO Act. Yeah. And what's interesting about using that's the novel part of this. That is often used to go after mobsters.
Yes. And
one thing that I would like to point out about this is that there was actually a prominent commentator during the Obama administration, a prominent right-wing commentator that y'all might recognize, that actually argued for the use of the RICO Act to go after the Obama administration. His name was one Benjamin Shapiro, who is now basically saying, well, no matter what you think about the all of these charges, or what you think about Trump, you shouldn't like this because this is the thing that happens in third world countries, of course. Well, it's dude, while you were like, you argued for using this exact law against Obama, bro. Yeah. Like they're using your approach. You should be flattered.
Yeah, except against an actual crime instead of a fake one.
An actual crime.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, let's get right into it and talk a little bit about RICO and like why it might apply, and then we can get into what's being charged here and the people that are defendants.
Yeah.
RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, and this is, again, a law to go after organized crime. It was originally put together to go after, like, mafia bosses. And this is actually a fairly typical kind of set of actions that you might go after with something like RICO. So it's a bunch of fairly disparate people that are working together towards a common criminal goal. And the whole goal behind RICO is that it enables prosecutors to charge defendants for overt acts that wouldn't necessarily always on their own be criminal, but are part of a larger criminal conspiracy and part of like a larger organization of people to affect a criminal outcome.
Yeah. So basically, think of it this way. A mob boss puts out a hit on, you know, some dude because he didn't pay his protection money or whatever. Mm-hmm. You know, the dude gets killed by one of the lower level mobsters. This basically makes it so that that person at the top who runs the organization can still be prosecuted for being part of an act that was a criminal act.
Yes.
And that makes total sense because you are, I mean, as we've talked about in previous episodes, conspiracy to commit an act means that you don't have to be the one that pulls the trigger if you were involved in actually doing it. And if you're the one that ordered it, then that especially makes it so that you should be prosecuted.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that a RICO case enables you to do is to include a lot more detail and context in like kind of defining the scope of the criminal case. So rather than like charging each like act individually, the overt acts are kind of bundled together in order to make a case and provide evidence for this organization of criminality. And prosecutor Fonnie Willis, who is leading the prosecution here, described this as, quote, RICO is a tool that allows a prosecutor's office and law enforcement to tell the whole story. And basically saying that it enables them to show like this pattern of criminality and organized criminality to jurors in order for them to be able to, make their best case. One thing to note about RICO in this case is that in the federal context, it's a really difficult and limited law to apply. So it was on the Federal Act was established just to target organized crime activities around money laundering, bribery, drug trafficking, and some other serious offenses. But Georgia's version of the law specifically says that attempting or soliciting any of the mentioned crimes in the act can count as a predicate act. So basically in Georgia, RICO prosecutions there's kind of a lower bar and they're easier to bring and they can be brought for more stuff. And so while this potentially wouldn't be a tool that could be used at the federal level, in Georgia specifically, where Trump has a really bad record with regard to the 2020 election, this like law is potentially much more powerful.
Yeah, and going through the actual counts themselves, you see that word solicitation a lot.
Yes.
Solicitation in this case meaning basically telling somebody to do something. So I want to try to read through the counts as quickly as possible. Like just
there's 40 of them.
There's 40 of them.
Yeah.
There's 41 of them.
Yeah, 41 of them. And one thing to call out here is like Trump is charged under like 13 of these counts. Yeah. And I found this approach really interesting to take Trump and Willis is planning to like prosecute all of these counts together and prosecute all 19 defendants simultaneously, which is more common in RICO cases than other cases. And I think this is really interesting and mainly because I kind of like the approach from a political perspective of treating Donald Trump just like another one of the criminal people involved in this organization. Like, yes, he's the head, But it's also like, yeah, but he's not the only person. And it really reduces the ability to say, oh, they're just persecuting Donald Trump, because no, it's a criminal organization and they're trying to go after the whole thing. It's kind of like if the DOJ had prosecuted Trump as part of like all of the people that were charged under January 6th prosecutions, because it would be like, oh, it's just part of the the criminal enterprise here.
Yeah. So count one, violation of the Georgia RICO, which we talked about a little bit. Count two, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, false statements and writings, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, solicitation of oath by public officer, false statements and writings, impersonating a public officer, conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, forgery in the first degree, conspiracy to commit forgery in the first degree, false statements and writings. You see that a lot.
Yeah.
Conspiracy to commit false statements and writings, criminal attempts to commit filing false documents, conspiracy to commit filing false documents, forgery in the first degree, conspiracy to commit forgery in the first degree, false statements and writings, conspiracy to commit false statements and writings, criminal attempt to influence witnesses, criminal attempt to commit influencing witnesses, criminal attempt to commit false statements and writings, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, false statements and writings, filing false documents, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, false statements and writings, conspiracy to commit solicitation of false statements and writings, influencing witnesses, conspiracy to commit election fraud, conspiracy to commit computer theft, conspiracy to commit computer trespass, conspiracy to commit computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to defraud the state, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. I think I said office in the other ones. It's actually officer. My apologies. False statements and writings, and perjury. They're really bad at writing the truth, apparently.
Well, okay, so as I listen to that, and we can summarize what the fuck those things are talking about. But as I listen to that, if I didn't have the context here, I'd be like, oh, these are like normal crimes that criminal enterprises do, right? They do criminal activities, and then they try to cover up those activities by filing false information and forging documents and soliciting unlawful actions by officials. Like, these are very familiar kind of criminal and boring kind of criminal charges, which I kind of love about this particular case. It's like, yes, these are related to political things, but the fact is that, like, you're making false statements to attempt to solicit, like, officials to violate their oaths of office. You're filing false documents and forgeries. You're impersonating officials by, like, I don't know, pretending like you're an elector when you're not, or something, or filing false versions of electors, right? You're stealing, like, data from and attempting to steal data and attempting to get past, like, government firewalls. Like, these are just criminal activities of an organization, of a crime organization. And, like, I really appreciate that this feels like somewhat of a normal kind of prosecution, even though it involves Trump and the 2020 election.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many cases that are at this point notorious and public, and in many cases actual recorded, of Trump soliciting people to violate their oath of office.
Totally.
I mean, famously, Trump said to the acting United States Attorney General, just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. On top of that, we all heard the recording of Trump's call to Brad Raffensperger, where he straight up said, "Go find me 11,000 votes."
Yep.
That is soliciting a public official to violate their oath of office.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, there's a bunch of detail in the indictment reviewing, like, the organization's attempt to harass election workers, and attempting to persuade Georgia lawmakers to ignore votes and appoint a false slate of electors. And the indictment also accuses Sidney Powell and several of the co-defendants of tampering with voting machines, which of course they did, because they were trying to steal the data that belonged to Dominion voting systems of all of these voting records.
And I would just like to reiterate, if all Trump had done was go around saying the election was stolen, I should have won, the election was stolen, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Exactly. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine like on a moral level.
No, it's not cool.
Wrong. It's not
but
cool.
It's not illegal.
But it's not illegal. Yeah, it's not illegal. Again, to reiterate a point that we made in our last episode, the speech itself is not the crime.
Yes.
It's the evidence used to establish motivation for the crime.
Yeah, exactly. And so, as we mentioned, there are tons of people named in this indictment. So there are 19 people named. It's also described that this is a criminal organization of 50 plus individuals. But the people that are defendants in this case are obviously Trump, his White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, his attorney and former New York City Mayor, Rudy Giuliani. Then you also have members of Trump's Justice Department, Jeffrey Clark, who we talked about last time, and who was like instrumental in attempting to, kind of take over the Justice Department in order to lie about there being election fraud. And then a bunch of people that aided Trump and his organization in Georgia, including, other of his lawyers like John Eastman, Sidney Powell, and Kenneth Chesebro, and then a bunch of other people. And one of the things that I think is value about a RICO case, which I know which has showed up in some of the reporting, is that because defendants in a RICO case are often numerous and often loosely related, right? They're all only organized around this criminal activity. One of the goals of the RICO case is to get them to flip on other people in the organization or on the higher ups. And so, like, now you've got a bunch of these people actually indicted, and they're not just getting subpoenas by, the House investigation, and they're not kind of waiting on the sidelines, waiting to see what happens. These people are actually indicted, and so there's a bunch of leverage here to potentially get them to flip and even get more evidence of criminality by Trump and his associates.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing, Donnie. When you surround yourself with people where their entire job is basically to lie to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Make you feel good and like you won an election that you didn't. Yeah.
You can't be too surprised if they end up saving their own ass, because you're not dealing with people that have integrity.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, totally. So a couple other things I think we should definitely touch on. One is on the timing of all this and how it may or may not impact the presidential race and potentially the office of the presidency.
Yeah.
So Fani Willis has announced that her intention is to try to get this trial to happen within 6 months. And that she wants to, as I mentioned already, prosecute all of the 19 defendants collectively. And pretty much every legal expert out there has said that this is an incredibly ambitious and unlikely timeline. So RICO cases can take an extremely long amount of time because they're very complex. Like one RICO case in Georgia has been going on since 2013 and has not had a trial yet. And so this could take a while just to get, a conclusion. And at the same time, you got 19 defendants, each of whom has their own lawyers, their own scheduling. They will file their own motions for continuance and all of these things. And so even just logistically allowing all of them an opportunity to review the evidence and construct a defense and all this stuff will be really difficult to do within 6 months.
Although another thing that should be noted is that this is through the state of Georgia, which means it is not through the federal government.
Yes.
And the reason why that's important is because, number one, it means that if Trump does become president, he can't pardon himself.
Yes.
And number two, it means that if he becomes president, he can't shut this down.
Yes.
Because it's not the Department of Justice that's investigating him. Now, I don't know if there might be some type of lawsuit that might need to be settled by the Supreme Court, because there is definitely an open question as to whether or not you can prosecute a sitting president.
Yeah.
And
totally.
something like that could very likely end up in front of the Supreme Court. At least in terms of using his powers as the president and his control over the Justice Department.
Yeah.
He can't really do anything about this. And on top of that, Georgia is a very interesting state when it comes to pardons because the government, or rather the governor, cannot just pardon anybody. In fact, the government doesn't pardon anybody. There's a pardoning board that makes decisions about pardons after the person has already served time. They can only be granted 5 years after the person is released. They cannot be granted while the person is serving or before the person has been charged. So even if a Republican governor of Georgia wanted to pardon Trump, which I have the feeling that, that's not going to be number one on Kemp's list, he can't.
Yeah.
So there's really not much that Trump could do in that case to get out of being prosecuted, or rather to get out of serving a jail sentence if he is found guilty.
Yeah. Yeah. This one seems like it might be the case most likely to put Trump behind bars, especially because in RICO cases, there's a minimum sentence of 5 years. So if he's convicted, he goes to prison unless there's some kind of intervening exception made for presidents. I could also see potential. I mean, I'm just making this up, but you might see well, let's delay this conclusion of this prosecution if he gets elected or something until after his presidency, at which time we can sentence him, or something like that. It is totally unprecedented waters that we're in right now. This is just never before seen. So it's difficult to say exactly how this will turn out, but it's definitely true that he cannot pardon himself. He can't shut down the investigation, and there's really no way for him to be pardoned in Georgia itself. And so whether this will impact the election is kind of to be determined. But so far,
polling doesn't look good for Trump, though.
Yeah, totally. Since this kind of came out, so this came out on the 15th or 16th of August, at which point he was polling at around 53 to 54%. And since then, his lead has dropped to 51%, which, to be fair, is only, kind of 2 points in a race where he's leading by 30. But but it's the first time we've seen a dip as the result of an indictment. And his favorability rating has also gone down. So it's a little bit difficult to tell what's driving all of this. But, it's going to be really difficult for him to go through so many prosecutions and also campaign at the same time and also try to win that swing vote in a general election when people aren't even sure if he's going to be able to be in the White House and not behind bars.
And the thing is, I still stand by basically the same analysis that I've had several times, which is this is either going to help him or not really do much to hurt him in the primary.
Yeah.
But it's going to hurt him in the general. And as it stands, polling is not looking good for Trump. So Politico released a poll that showed several results that are not looking good for the former president. First, should the federal trial on Donald Trump's 2020 election subversion take place before the presidential election in November 2024? 61% say yes, 19% say no, 19% say don't know.
Wow.
So they want to know. Americans want to know what happened here.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Donald Trump is guilty of the alleged crime in the federal 2020 election subversion election case? 51% say yes, 26% say no, 22% say don't know.
Wow.
And the thing is, I obviously think he's guilty because we saw a lot of the shit before our very eyes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, numbers like that are not good for the president because most likely people that are at this point saying don't know, they're probably thinking, well, I want to wait to see the results of the trial.
Totally.
And if he is found guilty, well, we're going to see that number go up.
Yeah. I'm a little bit concerned politically about how much focus is being put on the outcomes of the criminal cases here.
Yeah.
Just because, like, you know, meeting the bar to be convicted criminally is pretty high. And if he isn't convicted criminally, it will look to a lot of that 26%, if not all of them, like his name has been cleared.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think the case that needs to be made is the 1-2 punch. And I think Biden's campaign is doing this as best they can without speaking directly to any of these cases, which they shouldn't be.
Yeah, they
but
should.
Like the 1-2 punch of, like, he's facing all of these criminal counts and criminal indictments, and these activities, regardless of their criminality, should be disqualifying for someone as president. Like, you're just too vulnerable if you don't make that second point to him not being criminally convicted, which is not the same thing as being innocent. It's just the same thing as not being criminally guilty.
Yeah. This one right here, I would say, is probably the most damning, because the narrative that the Trump administration, or rather the Trump campaign, has been trying to sell is that this is actually going to help Trump in a general election because people are going to see how fabricated this is and how bullshit this is. 44% in this poll said that the conviction case would have no impact on their likelihood of supporting Trump. 32% said it would make them less likely to support Trump, including a third of independents. And only 13% of respondents said it would make them more likely to support Trump.
Interesting.
So I'm sorry.
13% too high, but still.
Yeah.
Not that high.
So I'm sorry, but what that tells me is that 44% of people have already made up their mind. And of the people that haven't made up their mind, most of them, it would make them less likely to support Trump.
Yeah,
so
totally. Yeah, I think that's right. I think
good news for Trump.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, his original response to the Georgia indictment was coming out and saying, I'm going to do a press conference that's going to prove that this election was stolen. And of course, he canceled that press conference. But importantly, that wouldn't make any difference criminally. But obviously, he's trying to spin this as, like, he's only really making the political case publicly, trying to make the case that, he's just being persecuted and therefore it shouldn't have any impact on him politically. But even like in Georgia itself, like if the whole rest of the country didn't give a shit about the Georgia case, but Georgians did, that's a swing state. Trump's going to need that state in order to win the election. And so, like, to the degree that Georgians feel this at home, this could be risky to him. And a number of GOP strategists have talked about that as well. So we'll see what the impact is. I think you're right that ultimately, like, the path to winning the presidency goes through people that are undecided, and criminal indictments don't do well with, we can only assume criminal indictments don't help you with undecided voters.